January 30th, 1933. I know I usually do these reports at the end of the month, but I cannot wait until tomorrow. The events are too big, and they have happened too fast. I also usually start with a hook, a top story, or something to grab your attention, which I am not doing this time, but trust me, you do not want to miss this episode. Let's go. I'm Indy Nidell, and welcome to this special edition. Today we cover the political events in Germany in January 1933. John Wheeler Bennett writes, "In the last week of January 1933, the political world of Berlin hummed like an overturned hive." And that is 100% true. But first, I have to build up to it. If you remember from last time, the November elections saw the Nazis actually lose a bunch of seats in the Reichstag, a major setback that made a lot of people wonder about the party's future. And after more of these seemingly endless political moves, Kurt von Schleicher got Franz von Papen removed as German Chancellor and replaced him with himself. Von Papen was shocked by Schleicher's betrayal and started planning his revenge. We ended last time just after Christmas, with Nazi party leader Adolf Hitler planning to meet with von Papen. The plan was to meet on January 4th at the home of Nazi party financier Kurt von Schroeder in Cologne. This meeting does happen as planned. Hitler and Papen arrive separately and are photographed going in. So the meeting becomes public knowledge. The meeting lasts for 2 hours. Hitler goes after von Papen for stopping him from becoming chancellor back in August. But Papen says, "That wasn't me. That was Schleicher. You know, the same guy who got me thrown out as chancellor." Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels writes in his diary about this meeting that Papen is completely against Schleicher, wants to bring him down and wipe him out, has the old man's ear, even stays with him. The old man being President, music, Paul von Hindenburg, who really does keep von Papen close by, though I do not believe he's actually living with him. Hitler says that if there is a new coalition cabinet, he will join it only if he is the chancellor. Of course, there will be a good place for von Papen in the cabinet, and even places for some of his allies. And also, of course, they will remove Social Democrats, Communists, and Jews from important positions and jobs in German daily life. Papen will, I should point out, later claim that no, the question of Hitler becoming chancellor is never brought up, but both Schroeder and Goebbels write that it is. Word of the meeting gets out, and the papers write, "Do they think the point of the meeting was to get Papen to talk Hindenburg into appointing Hitler chancellor?" Chancellor Schleicher reads these reports and asks Hindenburg to tell von Papen not to meet with Hitler anymore, or not to meet with him without Schleicher, agreeing to it. Hindenburg then secretly tells von Papen to go ahead and keep talking with Hitler. This is Shakespeare-level stuff here. Hitler and von Papen issue a joint statement to the press on the 6th, saying they are not plotting to bring down the Schleicher government. Papen meets with Schleicher 3 days later to tell him that all he is trying to do is bring Hitler into the current government. Schleicher does not believe it. There is also this. An equally important result of the Cologne meeting was the major change in the financial fortunes of the Nazi Party. Music bankrupt in December 1932. The NSDAP, by the middle of January 1933, was once again rolling in big money because industrial magnates had taken responsibility for the party deficit. Von Papen has always firmly denied that he was, in any way, responsible for this deal between the industrialists and the party. The fact, however, remains that the miraculous rescue of the NSDAP from financial ruin dates from the second week of January 1933, that is to say, right after the Cologne meeting. Nazi Party fortunes were really fading in December. I mean, they had the very disappointing results in the November elections. They had huge money problems because they had been paying for campaign after campaign after campaign. Nazi bigwig Gregor Strasser left the party, and there was a fair amount of infighting going on. Getting their finances fixed is a huge deal for the Nazis. After the Cologne meeting, Hitler has been busy doing a little more campaigning, actually, in the Free State of Lippe, or Lippe-Detmold. This is a tiny German state of about 1,200 square kilometers or so. Just like 40 kilometers by 30, right? He gives speeches, starting in Detmold, in 16 little towns and villages there, over 11 days. See, there is a local election there this month, and Hitler wants to convince everyone paying attention that the Nazi Party is not in decline after November. The total number of voters here is about 115,000 people, maybe a couple thousand more or so. They go to the polls on the 15th, and the Nazi Party gets the most votes, winning 39.5% of the vote, which is up 5% from November, though still less than they got there last summer. Hitler is very happy with this, saying it shows a return of Nazi popularity. What about Schleicher then? What is he doing in Berlin? Von Schleicher continued in the fatal, short-sighted optimism and the unbelievable political clumsiness that marked his whole chancellorship, with unexplained political necrophilia. He resumed negotiations with Gregor Strasser on the very day of the Cologne meeting. Political necrophilia, brilliant writing, but Strasser has resigned all of his posts in the Nazi Party and carries no weight at all. Now Hitler meets with von Papen again on the 18th. Okay, there is a guy named Joachim von Ribbentrop, right? He sells wine, and he is pretty rich. He is also a Nazi Party member, a fairly recent joiner, and they meet at his place in the Berlin suburbs. They do not want anyone to know about this meeting, so they have very high security. Hitler's limo drives straight into the garage, so he enters the house from the backyard unseen, and von Ribbentrop's chauffeur picks up Papen and brings him in. Ribbentrop notes the main issue discussed at the meeting in his diary. Hitler insists on being chancellor. Papen again thinks this is impossible. Music. His influence with Hindenburg was not strong enough to make this happen. Hitler then tells Papen that he does not want to have any more talks unless his demand to be made chancellor is fully accepted. Papen puts him off for the time being because he still thinks Hitler can be persuaded to take the post of vice-chancellor. They have another meeting on the evening of the 22nd, and this is the real turning point. The security plans to keep it secret are pretty darn complicated too. See, it is not just Hitler and von Papen meeting this time, though it is again at Ribbentrop's place. Hindenburg's son, Oskar, is there too, as well as Hindenburg's state secretary, Otto Meissner. Papen has told President Hindenburg about this meeting beforehand. Meissner and Oskar Hindenburg, with their wives along, go to a performance of Wagner's opera Das Liebesverbot, The Bon on Love, at the Prussian Opera House, Music. And after being seen in public during the break, they slip out when the lights go down again and head to Ribbentrop's. Before the meeting, Hitler gives a big speech at the Berlin Sportpalast, dedicated to Nazi martyr Horst Wessel, who was shot last January and died from his wounds last February. Earlier in the day, there was an unveiling of a memorial to Wessel at a Berlin cemetery, and Hitler was there to do the honors. He leaves the Sportpalast around 10 p.m. with Wilhelm Frick and Hermann Göring, Nazis we have seen many times before. So, at the meeting, von Papen tells Hitler that no, Hindenburg is still not convinced that Hitler is suitable to be chancellor. Hitler says music, that he will only be part of a coalition government in which he is chancellor, and that when the Reichstag meets, the Nazi Party will absolutely not give Schleicher its support. Here is the thing, though. This exchange is pretty short. And then Hitler and Oskar Hindenburg go into another room for a full hour. There is no record of what they talk about there. But Oskar will later say that Hitler stressed that no German government could survive without Nazi support at this point, and that only Hitler could save Germany from civil war. Music. There may be more here, though. I will go off track for a second with a quote. It seems Oskar Hindenburg had other worries at this time. The Social Democrats and Centrum had set up a Reichstag inquiry into shady property deals connected to the so-called Eastern Aid Program, which had been set up to bail out East Elbian Junker farming estates. Serious charges had come up, showing that government money may have been taken from the program to buy property, racehorses, cars, and even luxury goods. Some of the people under investigation were friends and relatives of Hindenburg. And Oskar's likely part in this scandal may have come to light during more parliamentary investigation. This raises the possibility that Hitler promised to shove aside the Reichstag investigation into the Eastern Aid affair if he became chancellor. Wheels within wheels. Dinner and champagne follow, though Hitler does not drink the bubbly. Then Meissner and Oskar Hindenburg leave. In the taxi, Oskar Hindenburg says simply, "The Nazis must be brought into the government." Papen will once again say that they do not discuss the issue of Hitler becoming chancellor at the meeting. But Ribbentrop's diary entry, which seems to me more likely true, says, "Oh yes, they do." Papen reports on the meeting to Hindenburg, and in the report he does not recommend that Hitler be made chancellor, knowing how unsure Hindenburg is about doing that. Heck, Hindenburg wants von Papen to be chancellor again. Chancellor. Schleicher gets hit from the side around now when the Nationalist Party pulls its support from him. He has now alienated every party in the Reichstag from left to right. He was even denounced on the 11th by the Agricultural League for not keeping his promise to raise tariffs on food imports. Now he does get a chance for some real breathing room, but he blows it. Music. On the 30th, Wilhelm Frick suggests delaying the Reichstag until the new budget is presented, which would be a couple of months from now, but Schleicher calls for the session to begin tomorrow, the 31st. He still does not believe that the Reichstag would bring a vote of no confidence against him to the floor, because that would mean yet another expensive election. Schleicher meets President Hindenburg on the 23rd, though, just 3 days later, to tell him that his efforts to put together a coalition in the Reichstag that could survive such a vote of no confidence have failed. That was the task Hindenburg gave him 6 weeks ago. The only choice other than a Hitler-led government, Schleicher tells the president, is a military dictatorship. He asks for a permanent suspension of the Reichstag through a state of emergency, an endless delay in elections, and a ban on both the NSDAP and the KPD. Schleicher's proposed dictatorship would be kept in power by the army. Hindenburg rejects Schleicher's proposal. Even worse, Schleicher's plan for a military dictatorship is leaked to Music, the press, leading to a general outcry from all of his political enemies. I have not been able to find out who the leak was, but man, that is pretty serious. That does even more damage to Schleicher's government. Hermann Göring meets with Meissner on the 27th and tells him that the Nazis will fight any attempts by Schleicher to govern without Reichstag support. Ribbentrop meets with Papen that same day, and Papen tells him he thinks Hindenburg might now appoint Hitler chancellor, that it could maybe happen. The next day, the 28th, Schleicher tells his cabinet he's going to try again to convince Hindenburg to dissolve the Reichstag, delay further elections, and allow Schleicher to run things under a state of emergency. If Hindenburg says no, then he will resign. Hindenburg says no. Schleicher and his cabinet resign that day. Hindenburg also points out that Schleicher himself said at the beginning of December that doing what Schleicher now wants would break the constitution and start a civil war in Germany. We saw that last time. Hindenburg then meets with his son, von Papen and Meissner, and they all agree that Adolf Hitler is the only choice for chancellor that makes any sense. Papen has convinced Hindenburg that the other right-wing parties that would be brought into the new government will hold back Hitler's worst impulses. Hindenburg says, yeah, that has to be the case, but it must be a coalition government with conservatives who can be trusted, and General Werner von Blomberg must become Minister of Defense. Yesterday, the 29th, von Papen meets with Hitler and tells him what is going on. And they agree that only 2 other Nazis will be in the National Coalition Cabinet. Wilhelm Frick will be Minister of the Interior, and Hermann Göring, Minister without portfolio, and von Papen will be Vice-Chancellor. Hitler says the first thing he will do is call for another general election, but he will get an enabling act passed in the Reichstag that lets him rule without the Reichstag. He can get rid of them. What a night last night was. Hitler and his group heard rumors that Schleicher and his associates at the Defense Ministry were planning a military coup. Some of the officers had indeed talked about this possibility, but Schleicher firmly rejected it. The Nazi leaders stayed up at the Kaiserhof Hotel until 5 in the morning on January 30th, waiting for news and ready for anything. Nothing had happened. Then Hitler had to go to the president's office for his swearing in. Today at 11:15 a.m., Adolf Hitler and his cabinet ministers enter President Paul von Hindenburg's office. Hindenburg gives a short speech, and at 11:30 a.m., Adolf Hitler takes the oath of office and becomes the Chancellor of Germany. He gives a short speech of his own, promising to uphold the Weimar Constitution. After that, there is a brief silence, and then President Hindenburg says, "And now, gentlemen, forward with God."